Hello, the program time about the basic events of the day. As observers had presumed, the murder of Vlad Listyev has aggravated the political situation. Certain details of yesterday's session of the Security Council became known today. A press conference was held by the Secretary of the Council, Oleg Lobov. The murder of Vlad Listyev has prompted the highest leadership of the country to return to the problem of the battle with organized crime. As journalists were told by Oleg Lobov, it was discussed at yesterday's Security Council meeting over the course of 2 hours. Assessing the criminal situation in the capital, Lobov stated that last year, out of 1,000 murders, 1/3 are unsolved, and the financing of the federal program of the battle with crime was caused to fall through. In this connection, the President has instructed the Minister of Finances to achieve its financing in full scale in the current year. Simultaneously, it's planned to strengthen organs of the public prosecutor and restore the investigative apparatus of the FSK. The journalists who were gathered were interested in the question, was Yuri Lushkov invited to the session of the Security Council, to which Lobov responded. There was no invitation made to Yuri Mikhailovich Lushkov, and I think this is connected mostly with the fact that personnel questions in Moscow were decided prior to the meeting of the Security Council. Oleg Lobov didn't comment on the rumors regarding the resignation of the mayor of Moscow. I saw the interview of Yuri Mikhailovich Lushkov on television, and he didn't mention his resignation. Regarding the dismissals of the prosecutor of Moscow and the head of the city internal affairs department, in Lobov's opinion, they should have left. Otherwise, after Listyev's murder, in society, there would have been an even greater resonance. Because, look, the question hasn't even been decided regarding Yedin and regarding other heads of law enforcement organs, because the State Duma is planning to discuss this question on the 10th of the month, but that does not mean they may adopt a decision, but that doesn't mean that the President will agree with that, because he today defines appointments of these top officials. At the Security Council meeting, they also examined the question of having within the government a post of a vice premier who liaises with law enforcement organs. However, because of differences which arose, a final decision was not adopted on this, Oleg Lobov said. Meanwhile, today the Moscow government announced its negative reaction to the intention of the mayor to resign. The members of the government based this on the fact that Lushkov's departure will precipitate destabilization of the political, economic and social situation in the city. The session was conducted behind closed doors, but upon its completion, the mayor gave an exclusive interview to our television agency. The dismissal of Pankratov was done illegally. There is a constitution which prescribes that all issues connected with the operations of the organs of militia, including personnel issues, should be decided in agreement with local organs. There is a law governing the militia which directly obliges all appointments and dismissals from posts of the heads of the local organs of law enforcement and militia, that these should be coordinated with local organs. And finally, in Moscow, so that all the I's should be finally dotted, there was a decree of the President signed about the heads of the City Internal Affairs of Moscow, in which it says that the head of the City Affairs of Moscow is by position a member of the board of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and all personnel matters are decided in conjunction with the mayor of Moscow. The requirement of business ethics, the requirements of principles of trust which apply to the leadership of the city are such that they must force all those making decisions on force structures, on the leadership of these force structures, to coordinate these decisions with city authorities. I attribute all of this to one solitary system, a system which is basically directed in its intentions against the mayor of Moscow, and I feel that all these decisions are such that require conclusions to be made by the mayor himself without waiting for his turn to arrive. I think that this is absolutely not to the benefit of the President, first of all. By his prompting confrontations with Moscow are very undermining, because Since the entire matter is headed in this direction, I have no other recourse than, after the necessary appeals to the ministries and the judicial sources, and I intend to do this, to make the only correct decision for myself, and that is the decision to resign. In my opinion, this is natural, logical, and must be understood by everyone who is observing the situation in the city of Moscow. Yuri Mikhailovich, may the toss of personnel issues ad infinitum continue, but can you tell us that you have the moral right to leave the city of Moscow and the Muscovites? This is very complicated and a very difficult decision, and I will make it after, of course, having consulted with the government of the city as an extreme step. The name of Yuri Lushkov some connect with the operations of the financial group Most. In the Rossiyskaya newspaper today, an article was published under the title "Snow Under the Snow, Sheer Dirt," but the Most Bank assesses this as another political provocation and reminds that the heads of the Rossiyskaya Gazeta had several times answered for lies that they had published and paid for the damage caused by money of taxpayers, because the Rossiyskaya newspaper is the only press which is the only organized press which is funded through the federal budget. These are details, but overall the situation involving Moscow is commented on by politicians. The Speaker of the Duma, Ivan Rybkin, feels that the refusal of the mayor of Moscow is well-founded to refuse the decision of the Public Prosecutor's Office of Moscow to dismiss the prosecutor of the city, Gennady Pomaryov. This he stated to Interfox, and from the same source, the leader of the Communist Party, Gennady Zyuganov, feels that a battle against Yuri Lushkov is underway, and he connects this with the fact that in Russia the decisive period of restructuring property is underway. Settling of accounts is in process among higher structures of power. This was a quote. Meanwhile, the president and the mayor met today in an unofficial atmosphere at the opening of a new building of the Malay Theatre. Journalists share their impressions and say that they didn't appear to be enemies. Probably now, the rebirth of Russia is mostly connected with culture, with a humanitarian development or formation. The public will move in this direction so as to truly elevate culture. We have probably no more great fear of the economics of it, or have we great concerns for some material means? We will overcome these matters. Is that so, Yuri Mikhailovich? We'll overcome. But culture must not be lost, but on the contrary, it must not only be acquired, it must be elevated, and we must somehow raise it up so that we have a truly Russian culture. That one which was the source of pride for hundreds of years, and that we should be proud of it now and in the next 100 years. During these moments at 69 Ardenka, there's a housewarming. Moscow intelligentsia, the audience, on the eve of Women's Day, received a marvelous gift. The staff of the oldest Malay theater is presented with a newly rebuilt building. I know this theater very well. I lived nearby as a child, the trade corner of Moscow near the Paviletsky terminal, and our teacher took us to the theater. Where? To Ardenka Street. And it was a terrible theater, of course, with an elongated auditorium and a very oppressive atmosphere. Then that was the way it was. And of course, as a child, I didn't understand that. But now I understand how difficult it is for actors to work in such an auditorium. On the extremely contemporary stage, a troupe of the reputable Russian theater gathered. The mayor of Moscow, Yuri Lushkov, congratulated all those who gathered on the housewarming and women with their wonderful holiday. The level of culture is the dignity and prestige of our nation, and how good it is that we are beginning to understand this. And we return to the death of Vlad Listyev, which was the catalyst to the development of today's political processes. I'll say that in the department of the FSK in Moscow, from 9 a.m. the 8th of March, that is tomorrow, a telephone line will be open to report information relating to the murder. Citizens who have well-founded information may phone 224-5454. It's emphasized that those who have well-founded information should phone, because during the last days there were many versions which turned out to be false. By 8 p.m. in Moscow, the first papers appear with an analysis of the day's events. And tomorrow's newspaper, by 8 p.m., the workday of the investigative team comes to an end. Since morning, information agencies all rang out with a chorus of new sensations. In the suburban Moscow Pushkin Sanatorium, a killer gang was detained. There's information about their involvement in Vlad Listyev's death. Our film crew came to this site and naturally found no information, and ostensibly the investigation conducted the evening before was not commented by. And here the extremely perturbed director with difficulty held back indignation. On the 4th of March, at 7:30 or 7:45 a.m. in the sanatorium, apparently 2 guests were detained, and not just detained, but probably taken into custody, who, by physical appearance, were similar to the composite drawings released the day before. According to that information which I have today, 2.5 hours later, all of these individuals were released. In my view, that there was some sort of a mistake, and a regrettable mistake which occurred, which could damage the reputation of the sanitarium. That's the first thing. And the second thing, that is, if even these individuals had been detained here, we must acknowledge the vigilance of the employees and the guests of the sanatorium and thank them. As was seen from the incident, our citizens haven't lost their vigilance or suspicion. To date, there were telephone calls today from many cities across Russia. The sanatorium Pushkin was the first major victim of disinformation, and also the gullibility of journalists who don't burden themselves with the task of verifying information, which one can't say about the investigative team. During the day, they received thousands of calls. The verification of each is compulsory, and now commentaries of the investigator. The publicizing of all sorts of facts connected with the murder, in my view, is even criminal, because the more the confidentiality of the investigation is revealed to a broader circle of citizens, the more it is known to criminals, and hence the search for criminals becomes hopeless. Let's not guide ourselves by rumors. I don't want to say that the public or the press should have to be completely silent about this matter, but in any case, concrete facts should not become the subjects of discussion, even concrete versions. Do you have any people arrested today? We have no detainees in this case. A very serious, and possibly for today, the most topical problem for Russia. This was the description of the problem of crime given by a representative of the American State Department, Christine Shelley. One of the serious negative repercussions of this phenomenon for the process of reforms is the association which gradually embeds itself in the minds of citizens between crime and the market economy. This she said at a meeting with the press. This point of view, unfortunately, is confirmed by operational reports from law enforcement organs as well. An unidentified person is attempting to extort $15,000 from the first vice premier of Yakutia, threatening to kill his children. As Interfox learned from sources within competent organs of the Republic, special services of Yakutia managed to establish a telephone number where the anonymous call originated. However, after verifying the number, services are inclined to think that the call was made by using an external connection of the line, circumventing the usual telephone system. This again speaks of the technical capabilities of the criminal world. Chechnya. In Chechnya, judging from information agencies, there were no active combat activities today. Our correspondent Evgeny Plakhin is in the region, and he just conveyed his report. The last stronghold points of the Dudaev gunmen in the southern suburbs of Grozny were occupied by internal forces of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia. This operation, which was launched with the participation of the Federal Army, sustained no losses. There are no injured or killed individuals. According to the reports which we have, no peaceful residents suffered either. The Dudaev gunmen retreated from the southern suburbs to their new pre-planned positions. They left behind mines in residential homes. Today, regiments of the internal forces of Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia and the militia of Grozny cleared the residential quarters. In the translation from military language, that means confiscation of weapons. Mines found in yards are detonated on site. There is no other successful method for now. In the city clinical hospital, an impressive arsenal of ammunition was found. In these circumstances, the city is gradually being restored. Soon the bread factory will reopen. In places there is natural gas and electricity. Some residents are returning to their city, to their home. Truly, the number of refugees from Chechnya is decreasing. Yesterday, according to the Russian immigration services, it was left by less than 1,000 people. But on one of the buses with refugees, a tragedy occurred. The bus blew up on an anti-tank mine. 10 people were killed, and all the injured were taken to a medical facility. This occurred 5 kilometers east of the populated point, Samashka. On this helicopter, we arrived from Mostok to Grozny. Now the helicopter is lifting off immediately with injured people to Mostok. Is that so? Yes. Not a moment of delay. The actions of the medics are quick and smooth. They will attend to the ill, load them up and load them on board, and then take them to the evacuation points. Now from Grozny, they go to the in Grozny. There's the hospital Batenka and the hospital Ministry of Internal Situations of Defense are operating here, and in other clinics of Chechnya each day there are 426 patients which were admitted, 23 injured and 403 ill. What is the condition of the civil population? It's terrible. They're in hunger. We expect outbursts of various infectious diseases. There is data in the sanitary epidemic station that these infectious diseases have already exist. Of course, the disposition is very negative. We help as we can. Doctors note that a basement disease has surfaced. It's also called dugout. When, after sitting in a cold basement for a long time, osteochondrosis reticulitis and polyarthritis, etc., arise, and to emerge onto the surface is difficult because there are mines at the exit points. Loudspeakers were not set up yet in Grozny, and mines can be planted even under bodies. And what is even more terrible, that they are unnoticeable and hidden under the armpits of victims. The central rescuers and the Ministry of Emergency Situations continue to exhume people from basements. They and other medics here are on a voluntary basis, and in 3 weeks there will be replacements, but there are those who will not leave. And how can they leave when their help is needed here? The First Vice Premier Alexis Kavets calls for the creation of a special group of analysts to predict the situation in Chechnya, because federal forces cannot conduct work to restore the economy separately from a political resolution of the situation in the Republic. Yet today there were many reports connected with the restorational work underway in Chechnya. The head of the territorial department, Nikolai Semyonov, assesses the work positively. There are few wishing to be responsible for that work, however. 7 people have refused the proposal to assume in the apparatus of the government of Russia the post of the head of the department on restoring the economy of Chechnya. Now, according to Fox, it remains vacant. From another region, alarming news is also beginning to arrive. Judging from that, the situation is escalating on the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We received a report from our correspondents in Baku. From Yerevan, for technical reasons, unfortunately, we only had telephone contact. First Baku and then Yerevan. After more than 9 months of truce, the situation has escalated severely at the Armenian-Azerbaijani border. Subjected to shooting from heavy weapons and rocket-propelled installations on tanks were populated points simultaneously in 3 Azerbaijani regions, Tosk, Kazakh, and Astafinsk, located at a great distance from the Gorny Karabakh. There is destruction, and the number of casualties is being specified. After a brief pause in artillery fire resumed on Azerbaijani territory. Armenian formations have attempted to seize one of the prominent heights in the Kazakh region, which would allow the enemy to increase fire on positions of the Azerbaijani army. However, this operation was foiled. All day today, combat continued. Experts in Baku feel that this is a flare-up of combat in the north and west of Azerbaijan and is nothing more than the type of a tactical maneuver. They predicted that in the near future, the Armenian side will launch an onslaught in northern Karabakh. The current situation places under threat the truce achieved with such difficulty difficulty by the conflicting sides through the mediation of Russia and the OSCE. 4 have died in their village, is a part of the Kursk region of Armenia. 20 more people in the area were injured as a result of the more frequent firing from the Azerbaijani side experienced here. Karabakh's recognition will unlikely be accepted by Azerbaijan, and hence this will challenge Armenia to conflict. On the entire territory of Armenia, there is a forced silence, but only the last report, which came from the press center of the Ministry of Defense of Armenia, reported that 1 more person died today and 4 more were injured. All the residents of the border villages are in a heightened state of alert. Returning to political events within Russia, our correspondent in Tataria will report. They're discussing the results of the elections. 467 candidates ran for 130 seats in parliament, 52 from the administration, many teachers, businessmen from many walks of life. Voters had to file out 5 different colored ballots. The pre-election promises of candidates were not unique in variety. They promised quick change, and yet it was surprising that 60% of the voters came to the ballot stations. In these days, this is a real result. This is mostly support and endorsement for the policies pursued by the state organs of rule of Tatarstan. Because, as you said, in our times, when many people are not working a full day and salaries are not always paid on time, we think that those measures which we are pursuing in social security and those concrete measures on issues which are of concern of the population do yield an effect. And so, by preliminary information, elected to the State Council of the Republic are 69 deputies, almost half. 52 candidates will undergo a repeat vote. The new parliament will begin its work when it acquires 2/3 of its membership. From the official chronicle, the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, received in the Kremlin the Prime Minister of Hungary, Gyula Horn. Greeting the guest, the head of state of Russia congratulated him on his first visit to Moscow in the capacity of the head of the government of Hungary. Today, receiving in the Kremlin the Prime Minister of Hungary, Gyula Horn, Boris Yeltsin stated that active dialogue between Moscow and Budapest has facilitated progress in many issues regarding two-sided relations. In the opinion of the participants of today's meeting, with the stepping into force of the political agreement between the 2 countries, conducive opportunities are open to broaden spheres of mutually beneficial Russian-Hungarian cooperation. Discussing international problems, Boris Yeltsin and Gyula Horn spoke out for continued movement toward creating a sturdy, all-encompassing system of security and cooperation on the European continent. Today, the Hungarian Prime Minister discussed with the chairman of the State Duma, Ivan Rybkin, various aspects of Russian-Hungarian relations, specifically regarding perspectives of developing ties between the parliaments of the 2 countries. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia is preparing a plan of action in connection with the heightened tension in former Yugoslavia. This was stated today at a briefing in Moscow. And the official representative of the Secretary General of the UN, Fred Eckert, said that in Croatia preparations are in full swing for a Croat-Serb war. Fears regarding the conflagration of the war in the last days are more concrete. The Croats and the so-called Krajina Serbs living on the 1/3 of the territory of the Croat Republic are striving for more beneficial tactical positions by the end of March. I'll remind you that on the decision of the leadership of Croatia, as of the 31st of March, the UN peacekeeping force should abandon its positions. And until now, these forces were the restraining factor, which impeded a conflagration of a new war between the Croats and the Krajina Serbs. One must also note that literally yesterday a decision was adopted to create a united command of the Croat army and the armed forces of the Muslim Croat Federation. The formation of this military organ was a response to the institution on the 20th of February of a unified defense council of the Bosnian Serbs and Serbs residing in Croatia. If one keeps in mind the fact that the sides warring in Bosnia-Herzegovina are using the current 4-month truce in order to relocate and reinforce their forces, the threat of a new armed conflict in not 1 but in 2 republics of former Yugoslavia is understandable. In the opinion of observers, all hopes for the effectiveness of the exhortations for peace on a diplomatic level have led to naught, and was stated Monday by the NATO's Secretary General Vili Klaus, the departure of peacekeepers from Croatia will extremely intensify the situation in the Balkans with unpredictable repercussions. Meanwhile, the gradual integration of the countries of the former socialist camp into NATO continues. Military training jointly with the English Army in the Czech Republic. In the Czech Republic, military training, Lipna 95, have been concluded, the first in the history of the country, joint maneuvers of the Czech and English soldiers. They worked out tactics of interaction between ground and parachute paratrooper forces in combat circumstances. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Želněc, visiting the area, called the training an important element of the NATO program, Partnership for Peace, and the gradual integration of the Czech Republic into NATO. This year, it's planned to hold on the territory of the Republic 12 or 13 more such military training bouts with the participation of units of the United States, the FRG, Belgium, and other Western countries. The Czech Army offered NATO members to use its polygons and military airports, learning training centers inherited from the Warsaw Pact. At one time on these polygons, under the leadership of Soviet generals, broad-scale maneuvers were conducted by the fraternal countries. Today, the former brothers are knocking at NATO's door. However, they face many impediments, for example, the incompatibility of weaponry. In order to replace their Soviet military technology for Western technology and to adapt to NATO communication systems and troops control, the Czechs would have to be forced to spend billions of dollars, and the country does not have this money. And not by coincidence, when visiting the base of the Czech Air Forces, the Prime Minister Klaus, an economist and pragmatist, stated that Soviet technology, specifically the MiG-21s, are not so obsolete so as to be rid of and buy F-16 bombers or other American weaponry. The official permission of Washington to the sale of various types of weapons to former socialist countries here in the Czech Republic, they assessed foremost as a political gesture indicating the readiness to accept the Czech Republic in the future into NATO, despite all the objections of Moscow. Soon in Moscow, the so-called trio of the European Union will arrive, together with the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of France and Spain. Also, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the FRG, Mr. Kinkel, will arrive. He intends, apart from other questions, to discuss the problem of Russia returning cultural valuables to Germany. On this topic, evidently, the talks will be difficult, but this is in perspective. Today, in the FRG, they also discuss an intense problem, but an internal one. The German law enforcers have demanded that the government immediately ceases supplying weapons to Turkey until a final political resolution of the Kurdish problem is reached. In the last 2 years, Ankara has received weapons from the FRG, mostly trophy weapons of the former GDR army, which are assessed at 1.5 billion marks. Today, it's no secret for anyone that the purpose of the weapons is not defense of the southern borders of NATO, but a battle against Kurdistan gaining independence. Law enforcers and several deputies of Bundestag are for the revoking of any restrictions on the actions of the many Kurdish organizations in the FRG and for the recognition of the Kurdish parliament in exile as the only lawful representative of this ethnic minority in all international structures. At the same time, with an action in defense of the Kurds in 3 cities, Köln, Berlin and Bremen, activists of the Kurdish Labour Party have organized a series of terrorist acts against the largest Turkish firms in the FRG. In leaflets pinned up nearby, there are appeals for aid in the battle for independence, a boycott of Turkish goods, tourist trips, and also the re-examination of Bonn's policy toward foreigners. In Germany, there are 7 million foreigners. Almost 2 million of them are Turks alone, performing all the manual labor and, of course, dealing in everything and throughout, which evokes the suspicion of the burghers. The Germans explain their arrogance toward the Eastern people through the fact that they ostensibly support them through taxes in the budget. As Spiegel writes, however, if the Treasury's expenditures are assessed at 6 billion, revenues from communities of an Eastern origin exceed 20. In various countries, of course, naturally, people have different problems. In the United States, another scandal involving Michael Jackson. The name of Michael Jackson again flashed in the press, but not because of new songs or because of family problems. A cruel fate has provided the super singer a new tribulation. Michael barely managed to recover from the scandal with the juveniles when a completely adult employees of his estate turned to the courts with another lawsuit against the singer. 4 men accused the star and bodyguards of a barrage of sins. They assert that ostensibly they face danger because they know too much about the private life of Jackson. The bodyguards of the singer supposedly implemented varied methods of psychological pressure against the employees so that the latter would not succumb to temptations to tell the authorities about the morals reigning in the fashionable Jackson mansion. And finally, the plaintiffs again play the old card through speaking of the sexual solicitations by bodyguards of Michael Jackson. And without that, the already shaken reputation of the star probably won't suffer much, but this cannot be said of his bank account. We'll return to events in Russia. The remains of representatives of the House of Romanovs arrived from the German city Coburg to the former capital of the Russian Empire. On a foggy Petersburg morning, the ferry on the Karenin docked at the Bay of Vasilyev Island. To the city on the Neva banks, the remains were transported from Germany of the Grand Duke Kirill Vladimirovich and his spouse Victoria Fedorovna. Later, in the burial chapel of the Peter Paul Cathedral, a triumphant burial ceremony began. In the end of the 19th century, in the Peter Paul Cathedral, it was decided only to bury royal individuals. And for the burying of the emperor's family's members, according to the will of Nicholas II, a grand princely burial chapel was built. Here, under massive marble plates, 14 representatives of the House of Romanovs have been buried. In the end of 1994, the Grand Duchess Leonida Georgievna appealed with a request to the President of Russia to bury the remains of the cousin of Nicholas II, Kirill Vladimirovich, and his wife in the cathedral's burial chapel. After a brief requiem, the wooden coffins were lowered into the vault. The last mound of soil was tossed in. Kirill Vladimirovich was the first of the royal imperial court to leave Russia, and he died in the foreign lands in 1938. Today, more than half a century later, the remains of the Grand Prince and his wife have found their rest in their native soil. And again, in the end of the program time, I'll pronounce the name of Vlad Listyev. A benevolent concert assembly dedicated to his memory will be held the 9th of March in Moscow in the Luzhniki Sports Palace. And now I will just thank you for your attention and say goodbye. In a moment, Oksana Polonskaya will tell you about the sports news. Goodbye. Good evening. Briefly about the main sports events in the day. At the figure skating championships in Birmingham, the dancing skaters are now in the competitions. After the first compulsory dance was performed, Oksana Grishuk and Evgeny Platov are in the lead. The performance was best of all. I'll remind you that the Olympic champions and the world champions, Grishuk, Platov, training in the United States, didn't participate in the Russian championship, nor in the European championship, citing their partner's injury. Therefore, their performance is awaited with great interest. Tennis in the finals of the women's tournament in Indiana Wells. Mary Jo Fernandez has beat Natalia Zvereva in 2 sets. I'll remind you that in the semifinals, Zvereva managed to beat the #1 seed Arantxa Sanchez Vicario. In the world of boxing, confusion and anarchy. The emotions haven't yet settled after George Foreman was stripped of the title of world champion when announcing his intentions to return the title is Evander Holyfield. I'll remind you he lost the title of the strongest in April of last year, losing to Michael Murray. After that, Holyfield was treated for cardiac deficiencies in a hospital in the state of New Jersey. Rumors circulated that he would never be able to return to the ring. Considering the fact that soon Mike Tyson will be released from prison, boxing fans are in for many interesting things. In the NHL Championships, of greatest interest was the match of the LA with the debutante of the league, Dallas. The game was marked with enormous number of violations and many penalties. Penalty time in total was 140 minutes. Benefit was derived from this game by Dallas, 8-2 in its favor, which incidentally won the 5th straight game. In Moscow, the final preliminary round of the Russian handball men's championships began, and although the 6 teams to contend for the medal is already known, yet the battle in the remaining matches is for every single point, because the points acquired at the preliminary level are considered in the finals. You see how today the Dynamos of Astrakhan and Neval from St. Petersburg won, and leading in the championship is the Volgograd Kaustik. CSKA has 1 point less. Good evening. About the weather for tomorrow. A brief cyclone, which today is located over Karelia, tomorrow will shift to the Arkhangelsk area. Under its influence will be the Kola Peninsula, the Republic of Komi, and the Nenetsk Autonomous District. The cyclone and atmospheric fronts will bring into this area wet snow and strong gusty winds during the day from -3 to +2 degrees. In Karelia, in the northwestern region, in the Baltic states, under the influence of a lethargic atmospheric front. It will be cloudy and rainy, temperatures during the day +1 to 6. In the central and Volgovatsk area, in an area of heightened atmospheric pressure, variably cloudy skies, no precipitation during the day +3 to 6. In the south of the central region, it's sunny. The temperatures will rise to +10 degrees. In Belarus, in the west of Ukraine, and in Moldova, in an area of a lethargic front connected with a cyclone over Romania, it's cloudy with some patches of rain. Temperatures at night +1 to 6, during the day +10 to 15. In the eastern parts of Ukraine and in the central Chernozem area, along the peripheral area of the cyclone, warm air from the south continues to seep in. Here it's sunny, +12 to 17 degrees. In the east of Ukraine and in Crimea, up to +23 degrees. The Krasnodar area, Stavropol, and the republics of the Northern Caucasus will be under the influence of an anticyclone with a center over the southern Ural area. During the day, it will be as warm as +20 degrees. In the Chechen Republic, in Ingushetia and Dagestan, during the day, +11 to 16. Beyond the Caucasus, in an area of the influence of an anticyclone, partly cloudy skies, no precipitation. At night, +3 to 8, during the day, +12 to 17. In St. Petersburg tomorrow, it will be mostly cloudy with some possibility of light rain. At night, +1-3, during the day, +4-6. In Moscow and suburbs, variably cloudy skies without precipitation at night, and in the beginning of the morning, thick fog. Temperatures at night, 0 +2, during the day, +4 to 6, and as the skies clear, to +10. Our broadcast and the firm Dow Edwards wishes you a good rest on this pre-holiday evening. All the best. Goodbye.